Hi, welcome to the second part of the introduction to the outline generation portion of BoardOff. In the last video, I gave a bit of an overview of the Outline Parameters tab and spent a fair bit of time talking about the conceptual setup that's used for BoardOff generating the outline. Because this is particularly important to get your head around how this is set up in order to understand the parameters and understand what you're changing to get the kind of outline you're after. I thought it was worthwhile dedicating a video to going to another level of detail in how that conceptual setup of the outline works. So just quickly to recap what I mentioned last time, BoardOff divides the outline into four sections. The tip, which importantly, the tip extends out to include the corner, so the corner and the tip are not distinct sections. There's the corner itself, the mezzanine section, which runs from the corner up to the midsection, and then the midsection. The way BoardOff generates the outline is it draws a smooth curve between groups of three control points that you specify in the outline parameters. Those control points are shown on this chart as red dots, and you'll see that for each of the major portions of the segments that BoardOff divides the outline into, you'll see that there are three control points enclosed in a bounding box. So the way the BoardOff generates the outline is to pass a smooth curve through each of those groups of three control points. Now, when BoardOff does this, for one particular section, it disregards the parameters for all the other sections. So this means that each of those sections are independent. So the consequence of this is that you can end up getting a kink at the control point where the segments join. And the reason for this is that because they're drawn independently, it means that as you approach that adjoining control point, the slope of the curve can be different, and you end up with a kink. Now, this can be a desirable design feature, and there's lots of boards where you do have this, and for some it's not. So you just need to spend a bit of time making sure that you get the right sort of smoothness profile. Now, the other thing that I want to point out, which I didn't go into much detail last time, are these bounding rectangles that you can see around each of those major functional sections that I just pointed out within the segments of the outline. Now, the reason that these are important is that the center control point for each one of those sections is it's specified as a percentage of the dimensions of those bounding boxes. So the reason this was done is because it seemed like a more intuitive way to put the numbers in. But also, if you have an outline with a particular character and you want to preserve that, if the center control point was hard-coded in, or set as a particular XY coordinate, when you tried to change the overall dimensions of your board, so say you wanted to produce one same outline but smaller, if those control points were fixed in their coordinates, the outline would get distorted. By specifying them as a percentage of the length and height of the bounding box, the outline actually scales quite neatly. Now, each one of the sections included in those bounding boxes has some subtleties about it that do require some explanation, and I'll go into them in a lot more detail in the outline parameters when we're actually looking at the numbers. But the couple of things I just wanted to point out again before we sign off on this video is related to those bounding boxes, is that in the tip area we've got two separate boxes whose total height is the tip width that you'll specify in the overall parameters for the board. What's referred to as the tip bounding box only includes the area that starts at the corner and ends at wherever the first control point in the outline starts at. So in this case, it's a concave profile, so cut away. So you actually set in the outline parameters that horizontal offset for that point there, and that horizontal offset is obviously then the width of that bounding box. Now, because the corner is included as a portion of the tip, you're actually free to set the height and width of that board to height and width of that corner, whatever you like. So there's no real constraints on that. And actually, the dimensions of that corner can be thought of as a global parameter in the same way that the overall length and width are. The reason I say you can think of it as a global parameter is because there is no constraint on the dimensions that you can put in. The one other subtlety that I'd just like to point out, and again I will revisit this when we get into the outline parameters, is that the bounding box that goes around the mezzanine section, you'll actually see, and this is deliberate, that the control point at the end of the mezzanine section doesn't coincide with the line that passes through the top of the bounding box. Now this is not really obvious in this chart here, and that's because the midsection is so straight, so there's only a very small sort of amount of curvature in there. But I just wanted to point out that the height of that bounding box around the mezzanine section is the height of, in fact, the bounding box that starts at the end of the corner and extends through to the middle of the board. So that, for the mezzanine section, sets the height of it. The width of the mezzanine section one is still just based on the width of the mezzanine section, which is set as determined by the overall parameters of the board. But just wanted to emphasize again that the height of it is set, the height of the mezzanine section actually includes the height of the midsection. The reason for this will become a little bit obvious later. And most of the time, to be honest, the midsection is going to be quite straight anyhow, just for performance reasons. You do benefit greatly from having flatter sections through your board. So I'll wrap it up there. I just wanted to do that extra level of detail with the board outline parameters, because it is so important to understand those in order to make sense of the outline parameters. So just to wrap this up very quickly, because I do have a little bit of time left on the length that can go to YouTube, just do a quick summary of what I've spoken about here. The center control points are all set as a percentage of the dimensions of the bounding box for those particular segments. For each one of those segments, there are subtleties to it that require some explanation, and I'll go into in the outline parameters. The ones in particular that I spoke about are the tip in the outline parameters, referring not to the full tip width as you would expect, but just that segment that goes up to the start of the corner. The corner dimensions, you have no constraints on setting the width and the height of the bounding box around that corner. They really are global parameters in the same vein as the overall length and the overall width. And then finally, the point I wanted to iterate is that the height of the bounding box around the mezzanine section includes the height of the midsection. So the height of the bounding box around the mezzanine section is the height of the box that starts at the last control point of the corner and goes up into the right hand corner, the last control point at the middle of the board. Okay, thanks very much everyone for tuning in, and the next video we'll go over to the outline parameters page and we'll translate that conceptual setup into the actual numbers in that page and how you go about trying to get the outline you're looking for.